Yesterday was a day that shook the entire world. Like earlier, a few decades ago, there was 10 days that shook the world. Likewise, yesterday was another day that shook the world with a lot of expectations, several speculations, many conspiracy theories, all coming together into a mass of chaos, confusion, a lot of conscious disinformation, a lot of analytics around what is happening in Russia, in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, between Putin and Prigozhin, who of the Wagner militia, who was marching towards Moscow. Halfway through the march, he stops and he goes back. Now we hear that the Belarus president has given him shelter or given him space and has negotiated a deal between the two. And in all this, all we have are various speculations and conspiracy theories. For instance, was this financed or nudged by the US and its allies? Was this Putin's own game, trying to distract people's minds for the elections ahead? Was this because Putin now sees that he's losing and wants to go back, and hence it was his own person? We are all speculating right now. What's making things worse is that Russia as a nation has been cancelled. So all the information that we are getting is coming through the Western lens or a few individuals. Luckily, we have with us Nandan Unnikrishnan, who is the Russia expert at Observer Research Foundation, who has been tracking this not only from the sources that all of us get, but also through the primary sources which he has in Russia. So Nandan, welcome to this conversation. I think I'll just begin by can you just explain what happened in this one day when everybody forgot about the Modi, everybody forgot about Biden, India, US, Cairo, we forgot about everything, and everybody began to focus just on this march going towards Moscow.
Thank you, Gautam. Thank you for inviting me. Well, to put it in a nutshell, Russia recently acquired, in the past decade, has acquired several private military companies. One of them was PMC Wagner. Wagner was headed by a very colorful personality, someone who was a small-time crook in the Soviet days, spent about 10 years in total in jail, and was released in 1990, Yevgeny Prigozhin. And Yevgeny Prigozhin started by selling hamburgers in the new Russia after the Soviet collapse. He had several hot dog and hamburger stalls, and moved on to a fancy restaurant where he built his network. Then he ended up pouring wine at Putin's reception for George Bush. And from there, his rise has been spectacular to the head of the private mercenary outfit called Wagner. Wagner has had, or rather Prigozhin himself personally, has had a problem with the Russian Defense Ministry for probably more than a decade. Where the origins of that are, I personally do not know. But in Ukraine, it came to the fore with him virtually almost every day raving and ranting about the tactics of the Russian military, about the fact that they were not giving him enough ammunition, that they were not adopting the right tactics when trying to battle for Bakhmut. By the way, there is no question about it that the battle for Bakhmut and Solidar were won by the Wagner boys. They are the ones who pushed through and pushed Ukraine out of these two townships. What happened yesterday is essentially this. The Russian Defense Ministry wanted all these PMCs to register with them and be brought under control of the Defense Ministry. This is something that Prigozhin was not willing to accept. So he felt that the time had come for him to move against the Defense Minister Shoigu. And he started in the morning by taking over the township of Rostov-on-Don, which is the place where the headquarters of the Russian Southern Command is. He started his negotiations with the officers who were there. There was a deputy of the GRU, General Alexeyev. There was also a deputy defense minister there, and the first negotiations took there. And he wanted the Russian state to hand over Shoigu and Gerasimov, the general chief of command, to him. When this was refused, he says, "I'm going to march to Moscow," and he called this the March for Justice. And about 200 kilometers from Moscow, he stopped. And then Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, got into the act. Belarus President Lukashenko knows Prigozhin for many years. And I think he offered his services to Mr. Putin. And Mr. Putin must have said, yes, please try. Because yesterday, the Russian state clearly was attempting to resolve this without collateral damage. They did not want blood spilt on Russian soil, as it were. They eventually succeeded. Today, the resolution, some of the details are not available, but what we know is that the Wagner group have all returned to their barracks. Mr. Prigozhin himself is moving into Belarus. And please feel free to interrupt me when you think I'm gone too long.
No, no.
And
I think, yeah, I will interrupt you. There is a nice question which I'll come to from Rahul Pandey from the JNU. But before that, I just want to quickly ask you, um, this how important is Lukan, I'm not.
Lukashenko.
Yeah, how important is he in this larger scheme of things? How can a small country like Belarus, negotiate peace between Putin and the Wagner group on the one side, and why should either of them listen to him?
Well, two things are there. One is that
What is his moral authority?
yeah, Belarus and Russia are states which are moving towards a confederation. So while they'll remain two separate entities, they are going to be in one federation, as it were. Uh, but more than that, this was a question of the Russian establishment was unable to reach out to Prigozhin to get him to restart negotiations, which broke down when he left Rostov on Don. And Lukashenko was being a friend of Prigozhin. Prigozhin was willing to talk to him. I don't think Lukashenko mediated the peace as such, but I would describe his role more as a post office. He was the messenger who carried uh, both sides, whatever their demands were to each other. As far as I am concerned, the deal, we have seen only about 40% of it. 60% of it is unclear to anyone because on the surface it appears that Mr. Prigozhin has got nothing. And I don't think that would be possible.
No, so how safe? Because here, the other narrative that's coming out is you play for keeps and there are no prisoners, take no prisoners. So how safe do you think is Prigozhin in Belarus, given that both the countries are coming together? I don't know, it's very confusing. He's seeking safety from a person who is merging into or will be collaborating with Putin at a future date or a near date. And yet, I mean, Russia has put its nuclear weapons there, etc. Now, and yet he feels safe enough to be there. So, is there something that we are missing in between the three?
Because he understands that it is not Putin who's going to knock him out. There are enough people in Russia who saw his act as an act of treason. And they would have been the ones who would have taken. I mean, the fear was that somebody would take law into their own hands if he stayed back in Russia. So I don't think the fear is of Putin and the state. The fear is of
Putin's speech, where he was castigating it as a traitor act and all of that, was very hard. And I mean, if I were him, I would be afraid for my life. But hadn't he thought this through? Didn't he know this would happen? I mean, stopping 2 hours before Moscow. What is the point of all this?
Well, Gautam, I think he also realized that he could not reach Moscow. I think you need to get some basic numbers into play. The Wagner group was what, about maximum 25,000 strong. They showed remarkable maneuverability. They traveled almost 600 or 700 kilometers in the process of one day. So that is quite a lot. when you're moving in armored columns. But the fact is, once he stopped 200 kilometers outside Moscow, I think he realized that beyond that, he would have to face resistance. That this was the safe point at which it was to stop. Because after that, the Kantemir division and the Taman division of Moscow come into play. And those are the ones who stood up for Yeltsin in 1993 and bombed the Russian parliament. So they were not going to brook any resistance. And I don't think Prigozhin was capable of
So,
taking on
so
these
given
forces.
that, I still feel like, and I'm sure many outside, and I'm sure over the next few days, I think things will get cleared up. I still feel there are holes. Every second person in Russia is a chess master, and particularly those who are functioning within the defense, within armies, who are managing people, have to be ace grandmasters to do all this, and then to return back without anything. It doesn't seem very clear. Anyway, I'll come to Rahul Pandey's question. Don't you think yesterday's event was a hard bargaining posture to Shoigu to get Shoigu out and establish Putin's supremacy?
Well, we'll have to wait and see because I mean, Shoigu is still there. So let us see when he is out. Maybe this theory would be validated. But at this point of time, until Shoigu is the defense minister, it is very difficult to say that this is the right posture. I mean, this is the right argument. Uh, I cannot personally see Putin giving up Shoigu that easily. Uh, and that too because at the end of the day, as you pointed out, Mr. Prigozhin did challenge the Russian state, and the Russian state has power behind it yet, and therefore the Russian state is unlikely to effect personnel changes which may look like being done under blackmail. If effectively that's what it is.
So,
So therefore,
given what we are seeing today, do you think Putin has won, or do you think he stands little weakened? Is there a moral loss that all the entire Russia is not with him in this conflict?
there are two theories to this. One, and both of them are on social media. So I am not sort of inventing anything. One theory is that he is significantly weakened and that this is a blow to his image and that this is the beginning of the long term decline of Mr. Putin. I'm sure that I can't resist this aside. This is the narrative that the Western media will move with. But within Russia, surprisingly, there is another story, as it were, developing also, where Putin's popularity is actually likely to experience a bit of a bounce or an upward movement because many people feel that he has actually displayed leadership qualities in resolving such a remarkably complicated situation without bloodshed. I mean, imagine if Lukashenko failed to convey the right message. This could have ended in a bloodbath in the middle of Russia, you know. So I think one has to be very careful in trying to judge and jump to instant conclusions as to whether this has weakened Putin or not. I think these are early days, that one day that has shook the world, but we will see the results of the shaking
Okay,
maybe a
so
couple of
one
weeks
more
later.
conspiracy theory, for you to clear for us. Is there a U.S. hand in this? Do you see CIA signature in what's going on in Russia right now, or what happened in that one day?
I don't want to insult the CIA by saying that something happens in the world without their involvement. So I don't want to get into this question.
But that's a question a lot of people are asking and conspiring that this is Russia's stooge. Sorry, this is the U.S. stooge. You wouldn't want to get into that yet.
No, you see, I mean, there is no evidence to suggest that there was any direct US involvement. Uh, but the fact of the matter remains that Mr. Wagner, that is Mr. Prigozhin, is a mercenary. He is operating on a daily basis on a money economy. So there are always things that may appeal to him more or not. But the fact that he's seeking refuge in Belarus and not in Washington probably at this point suggests that it is not Washington that was behind it.
Okay, so Samir Saran has a question for us, which is, would it be fair to say that the anti-war alliance, however small it may be, will be further diminished because of this?
Yeah, undoubtedly. I think Samir is right in that. Uh, the anti war alliance will not be significantly strengthened by what had happened. In fact, what is likely to happen now is the feeling that this war in Ukraine now has to be executed to whatever tragic end it may lead will actually grow in Russia, and particularly amongst the youth, which is, I have found last time I interacted with some Russian youth December last year, I found surprising that they were all pro Putin. I would have thought they would be the, you know, the ones outliers, but they turned out to be on the other side.
Um, I know it's futile to ask this question because it's just a one-day incident, but I'm sure that there are layers underneath also. What do you see this? Do you see this having any impact on Ukraine, US, Europe, in terms of the intensity of action, or coming back, or you think it changes things a bit here and there?
Look, there are
Let me
three, four
recontext it
factors.
for you. Sorry. Um, Both of them said that they do not want bloodshed, right? And hence he is going back, and Putin is allowing him to go back. Now, if the war continues, there will be blood. And so, if bloodshed, can we see the hesitation to shed blood as something coming in the future, that you do not want to shed any further blood?
No. I think, Gautam, you have to see this in the context of the fear of a civil war. Russia had seen a devastating civil war in the early 20th century, 1917 onwards, for 2, 3 years. And then they saw the devastation of 1993, when the parliament and the president ended in a confrontation, and you had the horrific scenes of tanks on a bridge firing at the parliament. Uh, by the way, the same divisions that were going to stand up to Prigozhin when he reached 200 kilometers from Moscow. So I think that horror of a civil war and the consequences of a civil war, the weakening of the Russian state, the dissipation of its strength, that is what was on the mind of most observers and probably most people in the establishment. It was also the fear of, there is a thing about spilling the blood of a fellow Russian. So yesterday, for example, to a large extent, the lack of resistance that Mr. Prigozhin faced is partly because the troops on the way did not receive any orders from Moscow to resist Prigozhin's advance. So he moved, barring one attempt by some aircraft to bomb him, he moved rather, as I said, quickly. I mean, he covered 600 kilometers in less than 12 hours, which is a remarkable feat. Uh, so that is one aspect. The second aspect is that I think Prigozhin by then realized that he had bitten more than he could chew. That the support that he was looking for was not forthcoming.
And,
And
and that is something, Nandan, that I keep wondering. These are all smart people, you know. Would you start a war or start a fight or a potential conflict without understanding that nuances of it, that, 600 kilometers versus 400 kilometers versus 200 kilometers versus 50 meters? Would you keep changing your mind like that? I think a good strategist, as we expect everybody to be, would have thought this through.
well, I am not someone who knows Prigozhin, so I don't cannot speak for the way he thinks. But to me, from the side when I'm watching the events, it clearly appears that he miscalculated. I mean, a similar assessment some people have of the decision of Putin to launch the war. That this was a miscalculation. So even the best of chess players make mistakes. Incidentally, talking about chess, there is a saying in chess that nobody wins in chess, one person loses. Because if you make a mistake, that's when you lose. If you don't make a mistake, it's usually a draw. So, given that, uh, people do make mistakes.
Okay, let's come to outside this immediate geography. Why has there not been any great reactions from the world over, other than just we are watching, we are, observing, etc., etc.? Did the world also know what? I mean, this one day thing is mysterious.
Well, I don't know what the world was thinking, but I am sure that uh,
Hardly any. So I'll tell you, there was no reaction. Let us say from India, there was no reaction. From the US, there was some minor observation kind of a thing, story based on sources. China is quiet. Um, Ukraine, I didn't hear anything from there. So this silence, isn't it very
no,
mysterious
but
to you?
what would you expect a state to say when a state, sovereign state, a non-Russian, whether a friendly state or a hostile state, it does not know how events will develop? What reaction can it give? You see, in fact, the United States yesterday held back sanctions on Prigozhin because they did not want to see him as being pro-Putin. So now today they look like they were on the other side of the fence. So people make mistakes.
Let's
So
come to images. So you are saying that Putin may have had a stronger image. Samir Saran says that when he marched, he was seen to be a war hero. And what does his image now? What is his image likely to be going forward now that he has had to
after
retreat?
after Putin's speech yesterday at 10 o'clock Moscow time, Prigozhin was no more a hero. When Putin declared that Prigozhin was a traitor and that his action was a stab in the back, whatever halo he had, a lot of it got lost. So, because at the end of the day, the Russian president commands a lot of support. He is seen as the main entity in Russia, and a lot of people follow and respect his opinion. And when he came on television and described Prigozhin's actions as treasonous, I think the halo of the Wagner group being the victors of Bakhmut and being the victors of Solidar uh, fell significantly. That halo they had was demolished. And after that, they were seen as what they are. And I think that is part of the reason why many of those who might have supported him, who may have had the same questions that he was asking of the defense minister, decided to keep quiet and keep their uh, words behind their teeth, as it were.
Let's move beyond personalities. What does this do for Russia's image?
Well, as I said, the world will be divided. There will be some who will think that this has significantly damaged Russia, and there will be some who will feel that Russia has displayed a certain level of finesse in handling such a situation without a bloodshed. Now, the jury is out. In my personal opinion, if you're asking me, this incident has not done Russia any good, its image abroad. But that is my personal opinion. What the world thinks per se.
We have Hulagu Khan who says it's now seen to be a weaker state than before the war. Sushant Sareen has a question. So, who survives now? Can Putin allow Prigozhin to get away with this? If he sticks to the deal, where does this leave Putin?
No, but firstly, Sushant, the problem to understand here is what is the deal? Right now,
Maybe his
what we
life.
know,
Maybe
yeah,
his
right
life.
now what we know is he has surrendered and he has been exiled to another country, and his people have surrendered. So whatever mutiny was there has dissipated. Therefore, in a sense, this is a victory for the Russian state. It has been able to effectively persuade the mutineers that it has the power to crush them, and that is probably the reason they pulled back. Now,
So, Sushant, he's answered your next question also that he doesn't need Putin. Does Putin need to re-establish his credentials as a strong man? What Nandan is saying is that he probably has, right?
yeah, well, essentially, and also the fact of the matter is, as I said, we are on less than 24 hours from the agreement that has taken place. we know less than 40% of the details of the agreement. And we are attempting to jump to conclusions as to whether someone has become weaker or stronger. I think a little bit of strategic patience is required, and that you need to wait a little bit before you jump to these sort of, decisive conclusions.
Okay, let's move south. Again, Samir Saran is asking this question. How is China placed in this? Do they play all sides or is Putin their only game?
A strong Russia is their only game. That is a united, even if it's significantly weakened by the war in Ukraine, but a united, consolidated Russia is what China would want. Breaking up of Russia is not in their interest, so that would be their fear. Uh, any internal challenge to Putin is a threat in that sense to the established elites that are reached some kind of equilibrium in Russia and are today controlling the situation there. So, from a Chinese or an Indian or even a United States point of view, Russia that is relatively stable, even if significantly weaker, is in everyone's interest.
Okay, let's move west. How is Ukraine taking this, the advantage of this situation? This is Mehul Tyagi. This is a big opportunity for Ukrainians to gain back the land. You think so?
Well, today the Ukrainian advisor to President Zelensky declared that they have not even started their counteroffensive. So obviously the moment has been lost if they have not started.
Okay, so there is one question of Sushant, which I'm going to just take and smother it right away. We are in the age of instant analysis. Can't wait for 24 hours. Sushant, wait. Sit down, calm down, and wait. Tomorrow, maybe Nandan will give us something more interesting. The other thing is about perceptions, Nandan. Uh, uh, I'm not saying this is a hard, is like, hard power, soft power, but the perceptions about Russia globally would be changing now. They will be shifting. Do you think this will impact the war in any way? Anyway?
Look, I think if you look at the situation on the ground, the support for the war in Ukraine is diminishing across the globe. And more people are moving away from the hard position that the West has taken. Yes, we call it neutrality in the sense that no one is openly going out and supporting Russia, but at the same time, nobody is coming out and joining the sanctions. The number of countries that are willing to condemn Russia are reducing. So, while at one level I would think that the United States has gained significantly and has played its hand pretty well in the circumstances, on the other hand, I think the prolongation of this war is not helping anybody. And I think the saner elements within the US administration are aware of this and are moving in that direction.
So, Nandan, one more question. Since you are more clued into it because of through the Russian channels that we don't have access to, what is the chatter in Moscow, in Russia, in Petersburg, among the people? What is the general chatter around this?
If you're asking me about yesterday, there was equal confusion there as there was anywhere else. People were not aware. But on the ground, when I spoke to some of the people I know in Moscow as well as in other cities, daily life was going on as usual. Restaurants were full, people were going to work, taxis were running, metro was running, everything was running. Although, on the other hand, you had video images of trenches being dug and stuff like that.
Also,
In
tanks on the supermarket roads, etc.
No, no, that was in Rostov. I mean, the problem is Moscow has many towns. I mean, Russia has many towns. Unfortunately, everything was being described as Moscow, so that was a bit unfortunate. This was happening in a variety of places like Voronezh, which is on the way, and others. But the important aspect here is that when in a strong authoritarian country you create certain entities and they enjoy a special status, then after some time, this violation of laws, as it were, comes back to bite you. And that is exactly what has happened, because Mr. Prigozhin was being seen as someone who was close to Mr. Putin, but not only that, that he could actually get anyone released from jail, because all you had to do is go and then commit to working for 6 months with Prigozhin in Wagner, and you were on the hook, right? So he became a very popular person indeed, and his value had risen above many others. So even Mr. Putin felt that it was time that he be cut down to size, and some suggest that Putin used him to cut down Shoigu. There are some others who suggest that Shoigu was used to cut down Prigozhin. What is the truth? We probably will never know till Putin writes his memoirs.
Fascinating. Thank you, Nandan. We would also wait for your memoirs uh, on, on Russia as a whole, and where this incident would possibly be a chapter. But I'm quite amazed by how Prigozhin, the entrepreneurial ability of Prigozhin to move from a chef to a general equivalent, and hold the attention of the world for one whole day. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank you,
joining in.
Gautam. Thank you.